Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. This is the sixth part of What If Deku Had a Robot Wolf. I hope you enjoy. Link to the original story and author in the description. Chapter 6, Entrance Exam Aftermath. Izumi. Inko cried as she embraced her daughter tightly, tears gushing out of her eyes. I'm so glad you're okay. I was so worried when Durandal told me what happened to you. Izumi returned her mother's hug, tears gushing out of her eyes as well. I'm sorry, I didn't know, she cried, worried about her newfound fear of heights and falling. It's okay, sweaty. Because now we know about it and can work to overcome it, Inko said. It's going to be okay, I'm here for you, always. Achiko and Durandal watched on as Izumi and her mother hugged, with Nito and Hitoshi close by as well, the two having been given a slight rundown on what happened to her, just minus the bit about punching out a massive robot. Whilst Achiko was happy that Izumi was okay now, she was worried about the large amount of tears they were producing. Is that normal? Yep, Durandal replied as Nito and Hitoshi nodded. It's got nothing to do with their quirks, by the way. They just produce a lot of tears. Can confirm that, Nito added. Achiko nodded as Inko continued to hug her daughter. The five had gotten more acquainted while waiting for Izumi's mother to arrive. Once Izumi had calmed down, that is. She was very interested in shifterbots, robots that can shift between multiple forms, and what happened whilst she had frozen up. Achiko was still stuck while she was falling, but her gravity manipulation quirk had a few neat tricks. She could reactivate her quirk on someone/something she's used it on before and move whatever she used her quirk on around. But it gets harder to reactivate it the more time has passed, about 3 hours before it's impossible. Luckily, it had only been 2 since she last used it on Izumi so that Achiko could reactivate it. Soon Inko broke off the hug and turned towards Achiko. Thank you for taking care of my daughter, she's been through a lot, and I'm grateful that you helped rescue her during the exam. You're welcome, Achiko said with a bow. Your daughter saved me from that titan, so it was only right that I helped her in return. We both want to become heroes and helping people is what heroes do. She said as Inko gave her a kind smile, motherly smile. Wait, you know the actual designation for those robots? Durandal asked, sounding surprised. Well, it's kind of obvious that the machines they used for the practical exam were based on certain bald-headed bastards robots. I mean, who doesn't know about Dr. Paxton and his army of robots? Achiko said. Inko could feel the venom in the girl's voice when she mentioned Paxton's name. She didn't just hate the man. She despised him. I like this girl already, Durandal remarked. If he had a mouth, he would have been smiling. I wonder why would they be using inferior copies of that madman's machines for the exam? Hitoshi asked. Probably because everyone knows them and hates them, Nito replied. Those robots are responsible for the deaths of over 10 million people across the globe. No doubt it'll be therapeutic for the people destroying them. Well, I'm glad you are all okay, Inko said with a smile before she took Izumi's hand. Now then, let's go home. Izumi smiled as they walked off, turning back towards Achiko and waving at her. See you around, she said, nervous. Achiko smiled as she waved back. Once done, she reached into her bag, but her hand froze just as it entered. You are, excuse me? She asked loudly, getting Izumi and Inko's attention. Is it possible for me to get a lift home, please? It's just that I misplaced my train ticket earlier and don't have enough to buy a new one, she asked, sounding worried. That's okay, I'll be happy to give you a lift home, Inko replied with a smile, getting a confused look from Izumi. Oh, don't worry dear, it'll be fine. I know what it's like to be on a tight budget. Are you sure? Achiko said nervously, I don't want to be intrusive or anything. Oh, don't worry about it. It's not the first time I've given one of Izumi's friends a lift, Inko said with a smile. I was about to ask if Nito and Hitoshi wanted a lift as well. Nito and Hitoshi shared a glance. Well, we did agree to have dinner at your place after the exam, so sure, Nito said with a smile before turning to Achiko. You can join us if you like. Achiko looked conflicted for a moment before she shook her head. No, it's fine. I already have plans for dinner anyway. But, will there be space for all of us? It's a 5-seater, so yes, there is room, Izumi replied with a smile. I'll be in the boot, by the way, Durandal added. Not exactly room for me anywhere else. Achiko nodded. She'd already taken up enough of Izumi and her mother's time, and whilst she didn't mind the offer to have dinner with them, they'd already done enough for her by just letting her have a lift to her apartment. The walk back to Inko's car was short and quiet. Izumi kept close to her mother as they walked, Durandal by her side. Inko's car was a cozy little car with 3 seats at the back and 2 in the front. She had apologized to Achiko that it might be cramped in the back with 3 people, but she didn't mind. Once everyone was seated inside, with Inko in the driver's seat, Izumi sitting next to her holding onto a homemade plush of Durandal for comfort, Achiko, Nito and Hitoshi in the back, and Durandal in the boot, they headed off. Achiko had already told Inko where her apartment was. So, Achiko, Nito said once they were safely on their way, you said you used your quirk to stop Izumi from falling, but we never cleared up what exactly happened to cause her to fall from so high in the first place. Oh, well, it was after she jumped up and one-shot the Titan, Achiko replied. Punched it right in the face, or chest? No idea why Paxton put the face in the chest. She what? Nito and Hitoshi asked loudly, causing Izumi to let out a little yelp as she hugged her Durandal plush tighter, and Inko's eyes widened in shock. The 2 boys quickly realized this and lowered their voices. Sorry about that. But seriously, you took out a 0-pointer? What kind of training were you doing? Hitoshi asked, sounding surprised. I should probably mention she was wearing me at the time, Durandal said, poking his head out behind Hitoshi. And yes, I am a shifter robot. It's one of those optional extras that we had added. Still, I didn't do all the work. Her quirk did most of it. Izumi shivered. She knew this would come up at some point. They were her friends, after all, and would find out at some point. They would have questions, especially Nito, since he can copy quirks. It's true. I have a quirk now, she said quietly as green lightning arced over her body for a few seconds. I could only use it since this morning. The 3 passengers in the back looked at her with shocked faces. It came in just this morning, Hitoshi said, shocked. Holy SSS shoe. But, how did you only just find out about it? And surely Nito would have been able to copy it. I don't know, no. I should have been able to detect it when I touched her, Nito said, before pausing for a bit. Ah, your quirk must have been suppressed. Pardon? Achiko asked, sounding confused. There are stories of people whose bodies were so ill-equipped to handle their quirk that it simply suppressed it, not activating until their body could handle it, Nito replied. Take the villain and Paxton minion mechanist. Reports say that his quirk didn't activate until over half of his body was mechanical. These cases are very rare, but I believe Izumi's body couldn't handle her quirk, so suppressed it until she was strong enough to handle it. Well, strong enough to use a small percentage of it anyway, Durandal added. We didn't have much time to properly learn how to use it once we found out she had it, but after some last-minute testing, we discovered that she can safely use 1% of her power without breaking her limbs. We believe it's a stockpile quirk of sorts. Ah, that's probably another reason I never detected it, Nito said, checking his hand. Her quirk was a blank. Whilst I can copy them, quirks require a stockpile of something I can't use because I don't have access to their stockpile. But still, only gaining access to your quirk on the day of the exam. I can see why you hurt yourself with it. Izumi let out a silent sigh of relief. She was glad that Durandal was covering for her. She would have struggled otherwise, especially after what happened to her today. Even with her friends there to talk to her, she was still shaken up after today's events, so she would have messed it up. She hadn't even come up with a cover story yet for her quirk, so it was good that Durandal was covering for her. She turned her head back and noticed that Achiko was looking at her with a worried expression as she processed this new information. Wait, are you saying that before the exam, Izumi was quirkless? Izumi nodded. Yes. Guess I must have been misdiagnosed when I was 4, she said, trying to draw attention away from the fact she still has an additional toe joint. Ah, now the puzzle pieces fall into place, Nito remarked. Misdiagnosed at a young age by an incompetent doctor and never getting a second diagnosis. I've heard many stories about that. I believe that the heir to the Yayarozu family was misdiagnosed, resulting in the doctor who diagnosed her in the first place getting sued by them. When did you get so interested in the rich and famous? Hitoshi asked. I'm not, Nito replied with a smirk. It's their quirks that interest me. I need to be aware of what quirks are out there since I need to copy other people's quirks to be useful, so I took a page out of our squad leader's book and took up quirk analysis. I will need to be able to analyze other people's quirks quickly, especially if I want to master using them. I was just looking up the current head of the family's quirk and stumbled across the article. Wait, squad leader? Achiko asked, sounding confused, still recovering from the shock that the girl who had saved her had done so with a quirk she could only just access today. Oh, that would be me, Izumi replied nervously. During the weekends, we sometimes play Battlefield, mainly Battlefield Dying Star, to help grow our teamwork, and I'm often the squad leader. Even if we all don't make it into the hero course, the communication skills we learn whilst playing it could help with our communication skills whilst in stressful situations. It also helps distract us from the hell that's been the past 10 months, Hitoshi added. Training for the UA entrance exam was hard. I'm lucky I met you, Izumi. I probably wouldn't have done as well as I did without the training we did. I would have been stuck thinking I could just coast by with my quirk and think I had lost the quirk lottery. That was not a healthy mindset to have. Well, I'm glad you two did well, Izumi said with a smile. Let's just hope that it's enough to get in. Inko smiled as she listened in on the conversation, not responding as she was focused on driving the car. She was happy that her daughter had made such good friends. Nito and Hitoshi were, whilst she was cautious of them at first, proved to be good friends to her daughter, much better than Katsuki. And she could already tell that Achiko was thinking about it. She was obviously worried about Izumi after all. Perhaps she could ask the two to share contact information, as it would be nice for Izumi to have another girl to talk to. She didn't have many friends after all. Her smile quickly faded when she turned the corner to the street past the apartment complex Achiko was staying at and noticed the police and military cordon blocking the entire street. It did not take her long to spot the tank embedded into the first floor of one of the apartment complexes. My God! Nito gasped at the sight before them. How the hell did that happen? That's the apartment complex I'm staying at, Achiko said with a horrified look on her face. Izumi watched the scene before them with horrified eyes, wondering how a tank got embedded into the first floor of a building. It was also the place where Achiko was living, so she was hoping that her apartment was okay. She then noticed Sir Night-Eye talking to one of the police officers. Without thinking, she got out of the car, still holding her Durandal plush, and rushed over to him, making sure not to pass the police blockade Sir Night-Eye. Sir Night-Eye turned towards her with an almost surprised look on his face. After quickly reassuring a nearby officer, he passed over to the other side of the cordon. Izumi, what are you doing here? He asked, sounding surprised. Just dropping off a friend at their apartment, Izumi replied, which currently has a tank embedded inside of it. How did that even happen? You said you were after the guy who made people go mad? We were, Sir Night-Eye replied. You were right about how he used his quirk. It did require direct eye contact to work. Good thing you noticed that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to apprehend him. Unfortunately, before we got to him, he used his quirk on a few JSDF soldiers, one of whom was a tank driver with a quirk that allowed him to make vehicles jump. The rest is self-explanatory. At least no one was hurt. Izumi let out a sigh of relief. It would have been dreadful if someone got hurt because of this. That man had already caused too much pain and suffering. So the guy caused a JSDF tank driver to go crazy and jump his tank into a building, Durandal remarked as he walked up beside her, her mother, Nito, Hitoshi and Achiko rushing up behind her. I'd say it sounds like something from a comedy sketch, but considering what could have happened, I think it's best that no one found this funny. Izumi. How the hell do you know Sir Night-Eye? Nito asked, sounding surprised. Well, Izumi spluttered nervously. She just had to go and ask Sir Night-Eye about what happened, didn't she? Thankfully Sir Night-Eye was there to cover for her. She's been helping me with a few cases I've been working on, he said, fixing his glasses. Her analytical skills are quite impressive. I might not have been able to capture the villain responsible for this mess without her help. You've been helping a pro hero? Hitoshi said, sounding surprised. How did that end up happening? Long story that's sadly classified, I'm afraid, Sir Night-Eye replied calmly. Only available to other pro heroes. Well, looks like we have another intensive to become heroes, Nito said with a smirk. Izumi felt a shiver go down her spine, but she didn't have to worry about it for long, as something else she had to worry about coming up. Sorry if I'm sounding intrusive, but that tank is currently embedded into the wall of the apartment complex, and I'm worried it might have damaged the apartment I'm staying at, Achiko asked. You wouldn't mind telling me what apartments have been damaged? Well, thankfully, only one apartment was damaged, apartment 202, Sir Night-Eye replied calmly. The color flooded out of Achiko's face as what almost sounded like a whimper escaped her mouth. 202? She muttered with a broken look on her face. With a whimper, she collapsed onto her knees, tears falling from her eyes. That's my apartment. Where do I go? I don't have enough to rent a new one for the night, she cried softly. Did my stuff survive? We managed to recover 2 suitcases, Sir Night-Eye replied somberly. They were undamaged, and the police are currently looking after them. Achiko let out a slight sigh of relief. At least, all my stuff survived, she said, relieved that she didn't lose anything. But, where do I stay now? I don't have anywhere else to go. Izumi felt bad for Achiko. She said she was tight on money already, and this incident didn't help. It was unlucky that this had happened to her. She didn't deserve this, not after all the things she did. But without a place to stay for the night, who knows what could happen to her? Without thinking, she opened her mouth. You could stay the night with us, she said, trying her best to smile. My bed has a pull-out bed underneath it, so you could sleep there tonight. The pull-out bed was because when she was young, she wanted to have a sleepover with Katsuki, but that never worked out, and the bed remained unused. What? Achiko said wearily, surprised that Izumi was offering her a place to rest for the night. Are you sure? I don't want to be a burden upon you. It's no worry, dear, Inko said with a smile. It'll be perfectly alright for you to stay the night with us. Yeah, you're probably better staying with them anyway, Nito added. My mother doesn't like having strangers around due to her quirk. And we don't have space at my home, Hitoshi added. Or a spare bed. The care home is kind of full at the moment, he said. He had long since told the others that he was in a foster care home since his parents could not look after him, what with his dad in the army and mother in a coma. Achiko looked up at Izumi, tears still falling from her eyes. A part of her was telling her this was wrong, that they'd already helped her enough, but she didn't have anywhere else to go, and she didn't want to call home for help. In a flash, she got up and hugged Izumi, surprising the girl and putting a large smile on her mother. Thank you, she cried as she hugged her tightly, thankful that she would at least have a roof over her head for the night. Izumi, for the most part, was surprised by Achiko's sudden hug. Thinking back to the practical exam, this must have been how she felt when she hugged her. With teary eyes, she returned the hug, "You're welcome." The two hugged for a bit before breaking it off. They then set about getting Achiko's stuff into the car. Despite being large suitcases, there was still enough space for Durandal in the back. And, after saying goodbye to Sir Night-Eye, they drove off towards the Midoriya's home. I'm sorry about what happened to your apartment, Izumi said with a frown. Even though Achiko had agreed to stay the night with them, it was still unfortunate that her apartment was the only one that was damaged by the tank. It's okay. No one could have seen it coming, Achiko replied. I'm just glad I'm not sleeping on the streets tonight and that my stuff survived. Is there anyone we should contact about this? Inko asked, like a family member? Just to tell them what happened. Yes, Achiko replied with a frown. I'll give you the contact detail of the orphanage later. Orphanage? Izumi said, sounding surprised, a sad frown on her face. Achiko nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. My parents died during Avalon's invasion of Japan, she said quietly. I've been living in an orphanage ever since. Izumi looked at Achiko with sad eyes, holding on tightly to her Durandal plush. It must have been horrifying for her to lose both her parents at such a young age, during such a horrific time. Can't have been good for her. She just hoped that the orphanage she lived at was a good one. I'm sorry to hear that, Hitoshi said with a somber frown. It's easy to forget that he hit Japan too, just not as bad as everywhere else. At least you won't be seeing any more of his bald head anymore, Durandal said. And I bet it was therapeutic smashing those robots up. Achiko smiled slightly. Yep, that it was. They might only have been copies, but it felt nice seeing so many of them destroyed. Especially seeing Izumi smash up that Titan. Yeah, that was kind of an impulse discussion on my part, Izumi said with a nervous smile. I saw you trapped and went to help. I would have been there sooner, but dash. Oh no. What is it? Nito asked, sounding concerned. What's wrong? There was another girl I was helping, Izumi replied with an annoyed sigh. She had a broken leg, so I was carrying her to safety, but she told me to put her down so I could help you. I forgot to check in on her. Can't say you were in the right state of mind at the time, Durandal said. You were in shock after all. Besides, I think she's fine. I saw Recovery Girl used her quirk on her, and she was walking away without issue. Well, that's a relief, Izumi said with a slight smile. Still, would have been nice to make sure she was okay myself. But, I'm still glad she's okay, she said. Even though it hurt her chances, it felt good to be helping people. It turned out that the apartment complex Achiko was staying at wasn't far from where Izumi lived, only a short 15-minute drive away. Once they arrived and parked, they got out and headed to Izumi and Inko's apartment, with Nito and Hitoshi offering to carry Achiko's bags for her. Once inside, Inko started work on dinner whilst the others got settled in. It was then that Izumi realized something. She had agreed to allow Achiko to stay in her room, since they didn't have a futon, which was worrying as she had never had someone round for a sleepover before, and b, she was going to be sharing her room with someone else, her room full of All Might and hero merch. Nito and Hitoshi had never been around much, and even when they were, she never showed them her room. And now she was about to show her room to her friends and another girl she met today. Oh, this was going to be embarrassing. So, is it okay to put my stuff into your room? Achiko asked. Izumi was about to say no, but she would have to enter the room at some point, so she might as well get the embarrassment out of the way now. Sure, she said as she led them to her room and reluctantly opened the door, expecting a lot of criticism. She did not expect Nito and Hitoshi to completely ignore it all and just walk in and put Achiko's stuff into the room. Izumi could only stand there with a surprised look on her face. Of course, Achiko looked to be struggling to hold back her laughter. What? You've told us several times that you're a massive fan of All Might, so we kind of expect your room to be like this, Hitoshi said calmly. Although to be honest, I did not expect you to have statues of 13, Interstellar, or Luna Soldier. You have a statue of 13. Achiko blurted as she zipped over to the shelf with her space-themed heroes on it, then began to geek out over them. You're a fan of the Rescue Hero 13? Izumi asked with a smile. Of course I am. She's the best. Achiko beamed. She's used her quirk to save thousands of people. I'm also a fan of Interstellar and Luna Soldier, as two of the three heroes operating on the moon. Aha! And you got them in their Luna costumes. These statues are only available on the moon, she said as her head slowly turned towards Izumi. My dad works on the moon on board a Luna harvester. Was about all Izumi could get out before Achiko zipped over to her. Your dad works on the moon. You have to tell me about it. Izumi was taken slightly back by Achiko's sudden excitement, not sure what to say or how to react. I take it you're a big fan of the Luna colony? Durandal said. Achiko nodded. I know almost everything about the Luna colony. From the companies working up there, the ongoing projects, to the heroes who operate up there. It's so awesome. It's my dream to one day visit the colony. Even though my chances of even obtaining that dream are slim. Hey, don't worry. I'm sure you'll be able to achieve your dream one day, Izumi said reassuringly. I always wanted to become a hero, but up until 10 months ago, I never thought I would be able to achieve that dream. I'm sure if you work hard enough, you'll be able to achieve it. You think so? Achiko asked with a smile. Izumi nodded. I'm sure of it. You just need to work hard to achieve it. Nobody achieves their dreams sitting on their arse all day after all, Nito added, so it'll be a while before Inko finishes making dinner. Why don't we watch something on the TV to pass the time? We won't be getting our results for at least another week, so we might as well relax. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea, Achiko said. I need something to distract me from my apartment getting a tank embedded into it. Nothing too heavy that requires me to concentrate, just something to relax to. Yeah, I think we all just want to relax after today's events, Hitoshi said as they filed out of Izumi's bedroom and settled on the sofa. The next few hours were spent watching a few movies while Inko prepared dinner. Occasionally having a little chat, mostly about heroes or the movie they were watching. Inko was glad that her daughter had friends now, people other than herself she could talk to. Aldera was such a toxic environment for her. Moving her to Nabu was the best decision she had ever made in her entire life, the second being agreeing to let her keep Durandal. Despite being a war machine built by the worst villain this decade, he's surprisingly gentle towards her. Why do you think she made the Durandal plush in the first place? When dinner was ready, they all sat at the table and enjoyed a lovely, large meal that Achiko said was the best meal she had ever had. Whilst they ate, Achiko asked a few questions about Hisashi's work on the moon. She was very interested in the Luna harvesters that mined helium-3. But to be fair, she was interested in anything that happened on the moon and space in general. Unfortunately, Nito and Hitoshi couldn't stay long once they had finished dinner. So, after wishing them good night and sending them home with some leftovers, Inko always cooked more than needed when they had guests around. Helped that the leftovers made great lunches, Inko set about getting the pull-out bed ready for Achiko whilst Izumi sat on the sofa, Durandal's head resting on her lap. So, where did you get Durandal from? Achiko asked, sitting next to Izumi. It's a bit of a long story, Izumi replied. Just like the backstory for her quirk had been planned out and rehearsed, so to have the background for Durandal my dad got him for me after an incident 10 months ago. He used a lot of favors to both acquire him and have him sent here. I'll admit, I was sort of against this assignment at first. But I've steadily grown attached to Izumi here, Durandal added, lying with a half-truth. I will also admit that this is so much more interesting than sitting in a lab all day. I'll tell you more about it, but kind of classified. Yeah, I figured that would be the case, Achiko said. Shifter robots are new, and there aren't many out there. Plus, they all have positronic brains. How did your dad even get him? Robots with positronic brains are almost impossible for people to own. No idea, Izumi replied. He never went into detail on how he acquired him. Not even Durandal will tell me. Guess he managed to get some favors with some powerful people up there. Helium-3 mining is a lucrative business, after all. Well, for those in charge anyway. If it's lucrative, why are you living in a small apartment? Achiko asked. We prefer to live here. It's comfortable for us, Izumi replied. Besides, we've been saving up most of it. Dad has to keep some to help sustain him up there, pay for gifts, and save up so he can afford to come home for a week or two every few years. Stuff up there is not cheap. Ah, I see, Achiko said. It is expensive to send things up there, after all. The colony's not yet self-sufficient yet, requiring stuff from Earth to survive. But still, it's impressive what we've accomplished in such a short time. And there's already talk about a Mars colony. Although that's a good century away. You must be interested in space, Durandal remarked. Of course, Achiko said with a smile before slowly frowning. My dad liked astronomy. I used to read his astronomy books while sitting on his lap, and sometimes he let me look through his telescope. You must miss them, don't you? Izumi asked quietly. Achiko nodded. They were good people. They owned a construction company but never made much money, so we were almost always in the red. When I was younger, I wanted to help them. My quirk would have helped me move stuff around, but they wanted me to pursue my dream of becoming a hero. So, that's what I did. I wanted to become a hero to make money so my parents could live comfortably. But then, Paxton took them away from me, she said, tears slowly forming under her eyes before she suddenly hugged Izumi. Izumi, whilst surprised by the sudden hug, wasn't taken back as much as before. So, with a slight smile, she put an arm around her. It's okay, Achiko. I'm sure that if your parents could see you now, they would be proud of what you've managed to accomplish. You kept your dream, even after what happened to you. Achiko smiled slightly as Izumi held her. Thank you, Izumi, she said. They would be proud of me. They told me to follow my dream, and I am. And whilst I can no longer support them, I can still become a hero to help others. So that no one else has to go through what I went through. Well, that's an admirable reason to become a hero, Durandal said. I may not have experience with it, but I do know that losing someone is never good. To come out of that ordeal with your dreams intact, just with a different drive, is impressive. Thanks, Durandal, Achiko said. Don't mention it, Durandal said. I may be Izumi's emotional support robot, but I'm not against helping others with their problems. Therapists aren't limited to one patient after all. Achiko smiled, feeling a bit better now. She didn't like bringing up her parents, as it always reminded her of how they were taken away from her. But as painful as it was, Izumi was right. They would be proud of her for making it this far. She finished the UA entrance exam. All she had to do now was wait for the results to arrive. Inko then walked back into the room. Izumi, Achiko, the pull-out bed is ready, she said with a smile. I recommend you two get an early night. Today was hectic. Both girls nodded. Today had been rather tiring, especially with Recovery Girl using her quirk on them. An early night would do them good. So, the two quickly got themselves ready for bed and quickly went to sleep. Later that night. Achiko wouldn't call herself a light sleeper. Once she was out and it would be difficult to wake her. But it was possible for something like a loud noise, someone letting out a panicked scream, to wake her up. She shot out of bed when she heard it, her eyes scanning the darkness around her. She quickly reminded herself that she was sharing a room with another girl and sleeping in a pull-out bed. Yet, despite the sudden awakening, she was grateful for it. Heavy panting to her side told her that Izumi, the girl she was sharing the room with, was the source of the sudden scream that woke her up. Izumi! Durandal said, getting up quickly and resting his front paws on the side of the bed. Are you all right? Achiko turned her head towards Izumi. She couldn't see well because of how dark it was, but she could tell that Izumi looked terrified. Did she have a bad dream? She remembered how Izumi had looked after she had saved her. The blank expression on the girl's face after Durandal had disengaged his armored mode, even with the broken arm and legs, she looked unresponsive, like her mind wasn't there. It wasn't until Recovery Girl had healed her that she started to respond, and even then, it took her a while to recover. What happened to her? Izumi was silent for several long moments, breathing heavily as her blank eyes stared forwards. Hey, Izumi. It's just a dream, not reality. You're fine. You're not falling. Falling? Achiko thought as she looked at Izumi. Did she have a fear of falling? She did freeze up completely after the fall, and thinking back to their meeting at the entrance, she seemed to freeze up slightly there as well. But what could have brought that on? She decided not to press the matter, as it was clear that she was under a lot of stress. Hey. Are you alright? She asked softly. No, Izumi replied quietly. Achiko could only just hear it. I get nightmares of falling. It's not something I want to talk about. Achiko looked at her with sympathetic eyes. She recognized the tone of voice as well as the situation Izumi was in. It was one she was deeply familiar with. Waking up in the middle of the night after a horrific nightmare, reliving a traumatic event from your past. It was why she was grateful for waking up from her nightmare early, as she did not want to relive it. Why the hell did UA have to use a Titan as their zero-pointer anyway? Achiko could tell this was a subject Izumi didn't want to talk about. Something like this rarely is. Especially since they only met today. You don't go telling people you just met your problems unless it's a therapist. Don't worry about me, Izumi said quietly before she laid back in bed, turning over to her side so that she was facing away from Achiko. I'll be fine. Achiko could only look at her with sympathetic eyes before she laid back in bed with a sigh. I'll be fine. How often had she heard that come out of her mouth? Far too many for her liking, but sometimes you just don't want to burden others with your problems, so you just tell people that you'll be fine and leave it bottling up your emotions until you can find someone you can talk to about them. It's what she did after her parents died, but that didn't do her much good, never talked about it until she was much older. Achiko could tell that Izumi was broken in a way, just like herself. She was showing signs of PTSD, not the same as her, but it was apparent something had happened to her to make her so scared of falling. She frowned, realizing that Izumi wouldn't be having a good night's sleep tonight. You rarely do after reliving a traumatic experience. But, whilst she couldn't talk about it, as they could never end well, there was something she could try to help calm the poor girl down and, hopefully, allow her to sleep peacefully tonight. Achiko quietly got out of bed and quickly slipped into Izumi's bed. It's okay. I'm here for you, she said softly, a slight gasp coming from Izumi as Achiko put her arms around her and held her close. I caught you with my quirk. Remember. I stopped you from falling. I saved you. And I promise, if you fall again, I will be there to catch you, she said softly. It wasn't much, but it was the best she could do right now. Izumi was frozen momentarily, not knowing how to respond to someone suddenly embracing her from behind. But it felt warm, just like her mother's. Thank you, she said quietly before closing her eyes, the feeling of a pair of arms holding onto her reassuring her that she wasn't going to fall again. With a smile, Achiko closed her eyes as well, grateful that she could help Izumi but also worried that she might be unable to keep her promise to her. And for invading her privacy. That will be it for this part. I hope everyone enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like and comment if you want part 7. If you want to hear more from me, subscribe. I hope to see you all in the next one.